Hello, my name is Viv. I'm 3 years old.
Veer's a real character. He's smart, funny, adventurous, full of beans, and he's very cheeky. But underneath his healthy exterior, Veer's body has been hiding a very rare genetic disorder.
I got anemia. You gonna help me?
This means that his bone marrow is not producing enough stem cells, and so his blood counts are dropping. He will always have a higher risk of certain cancers, but soon he will need a stem cell transplant. Due to his Asian origin, Veer only has a 20% chance of finding a good match. Unfortunately, no one in our family is a match, so now we are relying on the generosity of an unrelated stem cell donor from anywhere in the world. All it takes to register to become a donor is a cheek swab. You have the rare opportunity to save a life of someone like Veer's, so why not take it? There really couldn't be an easier way to save a life.
Community Assistant Team 8, CAT8,
is a group of Jain individuals and professionals
who are assisting the community at large
during the COVID-19 crisis.
CAT8 began just before the COVID-19 crisis,
when it held a can challenge,
Where children created iconic monuments.
using cans of food. It raised some 3 tons of canned food.
Enough supplies for 4 months.
for the Watford Food Bank, run by the Trussell Trust.
During the COVID-19 crisis,
CAT8 is helping the elderly, the vulnerable.
Those with isolation and key workers.
with meals and essential shopping.
Help with medicine collection.
and someone to talk to.
whilst coping with isolation.
CAT8 is organising webinars,
imparting information and creating awareness.
A range of topics for all age groups.
In addition, we have created
A business and education helpline.
For individuals and businesses that need further guidance on the topics of all the webinars.
we also have a YouTube channel.
A Facebook page and a Twitter handle.
CAT8 is a newest network fibre.
Connecting the community.
We are also very kindly and generously supported by a number of businesses to enable us to carry out our work. So without taking more of your time, today our speakers are Manish Shah, Fiona Carragher, Dr. Anuja Shah, Rajal Patni, and Vivek Patni. Manish Shah is the Vice Chair of the Alzheimer's Society and has served on the Board of Trustees for 6 years as a volunteer. Manish has direct experience of dementia by caring for his late mother who had frontotemporal dementia. The support of Alzheimer's Society to his family during their dementia journey was critical to enable his mother to continue to live with dementia in a supportive family environment for 15 years. Manish believes the society has led the way in uniting against dementia to ensure there is support available for people affected by dementia, enabling many other families to benefit similarly. However, there is a significant opportunity in accelerating societal change to enable people with dementia and their carers to continue living their lives with dignity, compassion, and with full support like other terminal diseases. Manish is a Senior Managing Director in Corporate Finance at FTI Consulting LLP in London. He has He has over 30 years of experience in corporate and private equity transactions across a range of sectors, including consumer and retail businesses, services, media, financial services, healthcare, and leisure. Fiona Carragher joined Alzheimer's Society in January 2019. As Director of Research and Influencing and a member of the executive leadership team, Fiona plays a pivotal role in the Society's vision to create a world without dementia. Fiona has overall responsibility for research and influencing strategy, leading the growing and ambitious world-class research program and the portfolio and work to strengthen Alzheimer's Society's position as the leading national charity on dementia health, social care policy, and societal change. Prior to joining Alzheimer's Society, Fiona was the Deputy Chief Scientific Officer for NHS England, providing leadership for the 50,000 healthcare science professionals in the NHS and expert advice to the health system on science, innovation, and diagnostics. She led a broad portfolio of policy responsibilities, including establishing the UK antimicrobial resistance diagnostics program and the system-wide action plan on hearing loss. She is a passionate advocate for women in health and led the establishment of the first Women in Science and Engineering Fellowship program in the NHS. Fiona is also a consultant clinical biochemist by background and a fellow of the Royal College of Pathologists. She has worked in multiple professional teams for 2 decades at Guy's and St. Thomas's Hospital, Royal Hospital for Sick Children, Edinburgh and King's College London Hospital, with focus on providing high-quality, innovative services. Fiona is committed to ensuring that we reach every person who has a dementia diagnosis and wants our help. She wants to change the conversation on dementia, mainstream the rights of the people affected by dementia, and drive the research agenda, working tirelessly to improve care and find a cure. Dr. Anuja Shah is a general practitioner with over 20 years of experience. She is a GP partner at the Wheatfield Surgery in Luton, and she is also a GP trainer. Anuja is a palliative care lead and has special interest in dementia, diabetes, and women's health. She is also a primary care network lead. Rajal Patni has spent over 30 years as a seasoned finance director for multiple businesses across UK, India, and North America, within technology, retail payments, and construction. In 2016, she took the leap into the health and social care sector after having poor experiences coordinating care for her father's multiple care needs and her mother's dementia, mild Alzheimer's, while she was still in full-time employment. To make a real difference, Rajal co-founded multiple technology-enabled care businesses across UK and India. One of her proudest decisions, and working with family, friends, colleagues to bring ideas and solutions to life. Rajal is a co-founder of the Mavi Home Care, an in-home care delivery business, and co-founder of and CFO of Lavanya Plus, which aims to improve social care outcomes using its digital technology, WeMa Wellness Management. Rajal is a fellow of the Chartered Association of Certified Accountants and volunteers as a resident representative for North London Partners STP Digital Board, as well as volunteering at the Barnet Asian Women's Association charity. She is also an angel investor and enjoys mentoring young startups. Vivek Patni. Vivek is a co-founder and CEO of Lavanya Plus. Having studied biomedical sciences at King's College, London, and working at Deloitte, Vivek brings passion, innovation, commercialization, structure, and compliance into Lavanya Plus. 6 years ago, whilst looking after his grandfather, Vivek realized his passion to make a change in social care. Navigating between the local authority, GP, NHS systems to manage his grandfather's multiple daily care needs was challenging, especially as he was also taking care of his grandmother who lives with dementia. So I would like to now hand over to Manish, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Rumit. Thank you for that. And welcome, everybody. And as Rumit outlined, this is our second dementia webinar. And for those who haven't seen the first one, that will be on the YouTube channel from Friday onwards. So what are we talking about today? And it's probably worthwhile just going to the next slide. Vivek? One after. So we're going to do a brief recap from the last session. Fiona will talk about care and also some of the work that's going on around research. And more importantly, I think certainly from all the questions that came through last time round, there is a significant concern clearly amongst people around dementia care itself, but also what next. So Fiona will touch on some of those research wins or solutions which are coming through, which hopefully will provide more hope for people who are affected by dementia. Anuja, Dr. Anuja will talk through the changes in the brain and which results in dementia, and also important to talk through early, mid, and end stages of dementia. Last time we touched on this, but we'll go through in a bit more detail. And of course, all of us would like to make sure that we can prevent dementia if we can by adopting healthy lifestyles or some other means of making sure that we can take appropriate measures. Rajal and Vivek will talk about practical steps, which if you're caring for someone with dementia, what do you do? And this is from their first-hand experience of looking after Rajal's mother and also Vivek's grandmother. And I will then close with just some resources which are available for people to access because there is a wealth of information out there. But like all of these things, you need to know what to do and how to kind of go about doing things. So before we get into the recap itself, just briefly, why am I doing this? Rumit touched on this. My mum had frontotemporal dementia, and we as a family went through all of these issues through the early, mid, and end stages of dementia. Significantly, last year at this time, we were in the kind of final days of mum, sadly, in her final days, and she passed away. In fact, Saturday is her first anniversary of her death. So it's quite significant that I'm talking to you about this right now. And I want to make sure that whatever we can do to help other people who are going through similar dementia journeys with their families, we can help as much as we can with the experience that we have personally, but also in my responsibility as Vice Chair of Alzheimer's Society. Vivek, can we go to the next slide, please? Yeah, one after. So we asked in the chat box last time around, what is the first word that you can think of when you hear the word dementia? And as you can imagine, through all the various bombarding of words that we've all sort of heard about dementia, these words which people talked about or put through on the chat, most of these are fairly negative, right? There's a negative association with dementia, which is perhaps not surprising given that society at large is still grappling with this condition. It is the biggest issue in our lives in this country in terms of number of deaths from dementia is definitely sort of number one in the list of conditions. And also significantly over the course of the last few months through the COVID crisis, again, people with dementia have been disproportionately affected. So it's not surprising that people are thinking about this in this way. Contextually, I think it's also important for us to recognize that there are 850,000 people living with dementia in the UK. And if you take the immediate people around them and their family, friends, there's probably about 10 million people who are affected in some way with dementia because of the fact that they're caring for somebody or they have somebody near and dear to them who is affected by dementia. So that's quite a large proportion of our population in the UK who is dealing with dementia. Globally, the numbers are truly staggering. I think we're talking about 20 to 30 million people with dementia, which is rising to about 50 million in quite short order. So this is a significant global issue. Vivek, next slide, please. So we also asked last time round, again, trying to put ourselves in the mindset of somebody who has dementia. Something simple like this: a cup of tea, cup of chai that we all like to have. So we asked the question, how many steps does it take to make a cup of tea? And not surprisingly, in fact, 90% of the people who responded have got less than 30 steps, because many of the things that we think about in terms of making a cup of tea are usually very much you don't really think about it very much. You take a tea bag, you put it into a mug, and you put some hot water in it. However, somebody who is affected by dementia has to go through a lot of different steps in order to get to that very point. So this is the point of this exercise, that actually somebody who has been affected by dementia, given that Anuja will cover how dementia affects different parts of the brain, logic, sequencing, coordination, all of these things are affected. Hence, if you break it down into its very component steps, there are probably over 30 steps that get taken in order to kind of make something as simple as a cup of tea. So if you extrapolate this to everything else that we take for granted and do on a day-to-day basis, you can imagine why this becomes such a big issue for most people in terms of how do they live their lives. And that's where Rajal and Vivek will talk about some of the practical measures that you can take in order to make sure that somebody affected by dementia can live well, because we know that it is something which people will need to live with for a very long time. Vivek, next please. So just a quick recap. Last time around, we said there were 5 key messages that we needed to have people understand so that ultimately you can become a dementia friend. I'll talk about how you become a dementia friend. I think it's important for all of us to become a dementia friend, to be empathetic about how people are affected by dementia. But these are the 5 messages which, again, I'm not going to labor on this. If you haven't heard about these, then I suggest you go back and watch the first webinar. But briefly, as you can see, it is not a natural part of aging. Dementia is a progressive disease of the brain, and it's something which is not about just losing your memory. And as I said, you can live well with dementia. It is a progressive disease, and it does take many years generally for the dementia to develop to its full end state. So there is more to the person than dementia, and it's important that we understand how we can treat people with dementia with dignity, compassion, and above all, with social inclusion. Fiona will talk a bit more about how during this current crisis, sadly, social care has been affected disproportionately. And again, this whole issue about dementia and the rights and also the dignity of somebody with dementia is so, so important. Vivek, next, please. So again, Anuja will cover some of this. There are over 100 types of dementias. These are the 4 main types of dementias. But again, it's not clear cut in terms of symptoms, how they develop between the different dementias in terms of there are overlapping symptoms. Again, Anuja will talk through a bit more detail about this and what to look out for if you are concerned about dementia. Next, Vivek. So we're going to launch we're just going to watch a short video here, and then I'll pause and introduce Fiona. So Vivek, why don't you take us through the video? Thank you.
It was his lively blue eyes that caught my attention. We said we would swim in every pool in London together. He had a career dedicated to helping others. At 3 in the morning, he would wake us up to see the stars. We had big plans for retirement, to travel and volunteer. But I started noticing small things until he went missing. That's when I knew something was wrong. The dark cloud of the diagnosis hung over us. Alzheimer's. We were given no support or guidance. He deteriorated quickly. First, it was his memory, then conversation. Dementia took everything. Our dreams for the future. And my identity too. I was his companion. Then I became his carer. I tried to cling on to the man he once was, but dementia slowly cast him adrift. Soon, the weight of it all brought me to my knees. We didn't have a choice. We took what was available. Luckily, it's a nice place with caring staff. But this isn't like other diseases. With dementia, we pay the costs. Almost £1,000 a week. We get charged extra because he has dementia. The social care system is like a river in flood. But there's no life raft to speak of, no control over our course. Money's running out fast, and I'm just doing everything I can to keep my head above water. Hope, if there's any to be found, comes from clinging on to the thought that one day another family won't have to go through this.
The social care system is unfair and unfit for people living with dementia. Alzheimer's Society are campaigning to end this injustice. You can too. Write to your MP today, asking them to take action on the need for immediate social care investment. Visit alzheimers.org.uk/fixbudget.
Thank you for that. Let me introduce Fiona, Vivek. Fiona, as Rumit sort of mentioned earlier, she's the Director of Research and Influencing at Alzheimer's Society. So Fiona, having seen that video clip, which you've seen and commissioned a number of times before, why do we have a situation whereby if you are diagnosed with cancer, for example, the whole weight of the healthcare system is supporting you. However, you get diagnosed with dementia, and as the video clip just highlighted, you are like a raft without any support as such. So thank you for making this time for us. I know you have a limited amount of time today because you're going on holiday tomorrow. So sadly, we're not going to have Fiona for the rest of the session, but Fiona, please welcome. And if you can take that question on and the rest of your section, that'd be great. Thank you.
So firstly, Manish and CAT8 for inviting me this evening. It's an absolute pleasure and an absolute privilege to come and join you this evening. I have to say, every single time I see that video, it just makes my heart sink, because that's not just the story. And actually, I know that the lady in person, I've met her a number of times, the carer. It's the same story for many, many families across the country. And what she's describing is the real challenge that we have with dementia, in that it's not seen in its entirety within the NHS. So if you had cancer, you would come and get your diagnosis and all of your care and treatment within the NHS. But currently, we have very little we can do medically in terms of disease-modifying treatment. There's not been a breakthrough disease-modifying treatment for 15 years now for Alzheimer's disease. So most of the care that's needed is provided by what we call our social care system. And the majority of that is means tested, which means that there's a significant challenge around funding. But I think it is wider than funding. It is the fact that once you get into the system and you need that help, it's very, very difficult to navigate and find your path through that to get the support that you need. And there's a real challenge in terms of always being able to find the high quality care that you need. So social care reform is something that we've been calling for a number of years. You may well have seen our Fixed Dementia Care campaign last year when we took Barbara Windsor to see Boris Johnson as he became Prime Minister. But it is a question of both funding and quality. I think the other point I would make, Manish, is that what we've seen through COVID is people with dementia being at the eye of the storm. So 1 in 4 of all of the COVID deaths have been from somebody with a pre-existing dementia. We've also seen a significant excess mortality. So this means that many, many more people are dying with dementia than we would have expected. And that's not necessarily just due to COVID. And we've done some really wide research very recently. We surveyed nearly 2,000 people, and they showed that they reported, 82% of them reported deteriorations in the symptoms. So this lockdown period has shown that people with dementia, because they're not accessing their normal routine, they're not accessing the health and care that they need, are deteriorating more rapidly. I think the final point around the video is that it demonstrates that dementia doesn't just impact the individual, this impacts the family, the carer around them. And we know through COVID that the impact, particularly on the carers, has been significant. And many of them have been coping without very, very little support in the last 6 months in really very difficult situations. And we are now facing a crisis where they are burning out. And the major reason for people with dementia moving into residential care from a home care is carer burnout. So I think that we're actually, hitting a crisis into the winter months. So all of that for us kind of is a burning platform for social care reform, and we're working really strongly into government, both in terms of learning the lessons of the last few months and ensuring that everything is put in place to prevent the significant deaths that we've seen, but equally ensuring that the care and support that's needed is there into the autumn and winter. But finally, we need social care reform. We need to ensure that you are able to access the care that you need. It's not that you only get care if you can afford it, and that quality of care is there across the country. So that remains a huge focus for our work. But I did want to give you some hope, and I think this is what Manish has asked me to talk to you about in more detail, is a little bit of where the science is taking us and where the research is taking us. Now, in the really generous introduction at the beginning, I think you've understood that I am a scientist by background and spent all of my career until last year in the NHS at kind of at different levels and at seniority in the NHS. And what I saw as the Deputy Chief Scientist was huge breakthroughs in science. When we think about what's happening with cancer and our ability to diagnose very early, to have very personalised treatments, we really have seen a breakthrough in many, many of the big clinical conditions. And my reflection, having kind of worked in science for 25 years, was that very little of that had broken through in terms of dementia and the diseases that underpin dementia. But what I have also seen is that science is moving at pace, and all of those huge big steps forward, the technology we have, our understanding of genetics, the use of artificial intelligence, are now being brought to bear in the diseases that affect your brain. And in some ways it makes sense that these are the last diseases for us to start really cracking, because the brain is the most complicated organ. It is the hardest to investigate and understand. But I am really hopeful that we are on the cusp of breakthroughs in dementia research. So if we just go to the next slide, one of the things that I wanted to talk through just very briefly, but just to give you a flavour of where the science and innovation is taking us, to hopefully give you some optimistic view of the future. The first thing I wanted to talk about was disease-modifying treatments. Now, as I said earlier, there hasn't been a new disease-modifying treatment in 15 years. But very recently, and I mean over the weekend, we heard that a new drug called aducanumab which essentially attaches to the abnormal protein amyloid in the brain and helps to remove it in Alzheimer's disease. This drug called aducanumab, which is being developed by a company called Biogen, has gone through the next stage of approval in the US regulation, so through FDA approval. Now, this isn't going to be a panacea cure for Alzheimer's disease, and we are, a little way off getting this into the clinical treatment. But for this to get all the way through to FDA regulation is a huge step forward. And I think that, again, it shows that it takes a long time for research findings to get through to clinical practice. So the first step on the road to aducanumab was a genetics research project that the Alzheimer's Society funded nearly 20 years ago. And that piece of information was taken and built upon year on year until we're now on the cusp of a new disease-modifying treatment coming into clinical practice. And one of the things that we know in science and in medical science that has really enabled us to take big steps in clinical treatments has been our understanding of gene therapy and genetics. And I thought it was wonderful at the beginning that you showed the story of Via, who had a genetic disorder called Fanconi anemia. And what we're able to do is really learn from these very rare inherited diseases in terms of therapies for the future. So with dementia and with some of the diseases that cause dementia, we know that there is a genetic component. And one of the diseases called frontal temporal dementia is caused by a very rare gene defect. And we're starting at the UK Dementia Research Institute, of where we are a founding funder, we're starting to look at gene therapy in these very rare inherited forms of dementia. But by doing that, it begins to unlock our understanding of the wider diseases, and again, give us hope for new therapies and treatments in the future. But one of the really important elements of this is about having a very accurate diagnostic test. So some of you on this webinar may have had a blood test to look for cholesterol, for example, that tells you which gives you an indication of what your risk of developing cardiac disease in the future would be. We need those kinds of diagnostic tests that are simple, that are easy to do, that are non-invasive for dementia. And in very recent times, and again about 2 weeks ago, the most recent research came out on this, that we are very close to having simple blood tests for dementia, for Alzheimer's disease specifically, that mean we can actually take the blood test, look for that marker 20 years before you get the symptoms. So that ability to really see and understand whether you have got a risk of developing disease in the future, again, I think is something that will be hugely beneficial for those with dementia. And the next element to that is that early diagnosis. So if we were in a position to be able to much earlier understand whether you are going to be at risk of developing dementia, will actually enable us to put in place preventative and risk reduction elements. We know that 40% of cases of dementia can be prevented by taking quite simple steps, particularly in midlife, around diet and exercise, not smoking, drinking in moderation. And a very big review that was done, again, very recently, showed that there were 12 key things that can be done to reduce your risk of dementia. So if you pull those two things together, of having a very simple blood test that can tell you early whether you've got a risk of developing dementia in the future, and we know some of the things that you can do, again, there's a whole big piece on prevention that is kind of bringing us hope for the future. The final two pieces I wanted to talk about were around care and technology, because this is really about the here and now and about how we get the story right for those affected by dementia now. And as Manish has said, there's 850,000 people in the UK with dementia, 50 million worldwide. So this is truly a global challenge. So if we just go to the next slide, I want to tell you about some of the potential of technology that is really enabling us to think very differently about supporting people to live independently at home. Now, we're part of the UK Dementia Research Institute, which is 7 of the leading academic centres in the UK, including Cambridge, Imperial, University College London. And one of the exciting centres is the Carer Technology Centre. And what they're looking at is what's been described as a healthy home initiative. So these are using a whole host of different technologies and biosensors that enable someone to get very early warning signs of whether they're going to deteriorate in their clinical condition. So they have dementia, they're at home, but we know some of the major reasons that people go into hospital, for example, are things like a urinary tract infection or falling over. So what the Technology Centre is doing at Imperial is starting to look at all different ways of finding an early indicator of whether you're going to develop, for example, a urinary infection or developing falls. And I think what's really exciting about this is that this has the potential to be used very soon for people with dementia. And certainly during COVID, some of these technologies were being deployed to support people to live independently through a time when a lot of our health and care system was in shutdown. So again, huge hope for the future in terms of using technology and using some of the technologies that we already have, such as an Alexa, to help you remember some of your daily tasks. And if you just go to the final slide, Vivek, I just wanted to tell you about our care research, because what's really important, whilst as a scientist I am absolutely hopeful for huge big scientific breakthroughs in the diseases that cause dementia, but we know there's a lot more we need to understand to enable people with dementia to live as well as possible. And the Alzheimer's Society has taken this as a real priority for us and has invested a significant amount of money to improve the care for people with dementia here and now. And we're doing this through our Centres of Excellence programme. And we've got 3 that are currently making enormous strides in understanding what good care looks like, with Linda Clare in Exeter, who's looking at the whole aspect of mental and physical well-being to enable people with dementia to live as well as possible. And it is possible to live well, but we want to understand what are the things and the steps that you can do if you have that diagnosis. We've got Dame Louise Robinson in Newcastle, who is a GP by background, and her work focuses on really good post-diagnostic support, because we know, and many people with living with family members who have dementia know, that one of the hardest things is to navigate your way around the support and care that you need. That really good wrap-round hand-holding, that once you have your diagnosis that you are supported through it. And Louise is doing amazing work to really understand and to test different ways of doing that and to bring our GP community on board with us. And then finally, Claudia Cooper, who's in University College London, is looking at the aspects of carers, particularly thinking about the major challenges of depression and anxiety that lead to carer burnout and are the major reason that people with dementia end up in residential care. So again, through our Centre of Excellence, looking at what good care looks like. And from my perspective, I have a privileged role to not only be leading the research portfolio, but also our policy and campaigning activity. So that means that at very early stages, we're able to take the findings of this research and work with our government and our health system colleagues to say, look, this is what good looks like. How do we make this happen? And we've seen this through COVID, that the ability to knit together the evidence from our researchers into government policy has been critical. So it was just a very brief run through of what we're doing, some of the hope for the future, but there's no doubt about it that people affected by dementia have been hugely hit through COVID. There's a massive amount we need to do. We so thank you to this evening for us being able to raise the profile of this very difficult condition. But I look forward to working with you all and hearing from you all in the future.
Thank you, Fiona. That was terrific. And as we sort of set out before, it is important to have hope during this tough time that people are having with this. And good luck and with all the stuff that you're doing in terms of the social care reform that is imminent, hopefully, with government. But more importantly and more immediately, have a great holiday, and I shall see you soon. Thank you, Fiona, for all your help today.
Thank you.
So just to pass on the baton to Anuja, and who can take us through some of the things that were touched upon by Fiona and a bit more detail around dementia and the condition and stuff. Anuja.
Thank you, Manish. And I know Fiona has just left us, but a big thank you to Fiona for that really inspiring talk and bringing us some hope and optimism for the future. So I want all of you to just give yourselves 2 seconds and think of everything that is important to you. Now think how you would feel if it was all taken away from you. Your dignity, your respect, your privacy, and your family life. This happens to thousands of patients with dementia. We need to change this. We're going to I'm going to take you through to a journey of a person's life, someone who has dementia. Next slide. So it all starts off in the brain. As Manish mentioned, there are several subtypes of dementia, and Alzheimer's disease, vascular dementia, frontotemporal dementia, and dementia with Lewy body are just a few, but there are more than 100 subtypes of dementia. The process of the damage that happens in Alzheimer's disease is that there's certain protein which wrap around these brain cells. These proteins are called beta amyloid and tau proteins. The tau proteins form tangles which wrap around these cells and damage them, and the beta amyloid form plaques which damage these cells. In dementia with Lewy body, there's similar proteins called Lewy body, which actually release chemicals and damage the brain cells. These eventually cause problems with thinking, mood, and movement. In vascular dementia, as you can see in the bottom picture there, there's blockage in the arteries or in the blood vessels of the brain, causing lack of blood supply to the brain cells, which then causes damage to the brain cells. Eventually, if you look at the picture of the brain, the picture on the left-hand side, as we see it, is a normal brain, and on the right-hand side, you can see how the brain has shrunk. So eventually, the cortex or the brain becomes thinner and shrinks. As the disease progresses, it spreads across the brain. So it may start off with in certain parts of the brain, and the symptoms depend on which part of the brain is initially affected. But eventually, the whole brain is affected. In frontotemporal dementia, the frontal lobe and the temporal lobe are affected. So the frontal lobe is responsible for our speech and the temporal lobe for our personality. So you can see how the patient's personality and speech are affected in this kind of dementia. Next slide. So if we go through a journey of a person who has dementia, the early symptoms are loss of recent memory, but they can remember things from the past. So they may remember something that happened 20 years ago, but they may have loss of recent memory. And this recent memory loss is persistent and consistent. So it's not, you just forgetting an odd thing once in a while, but it's a persistent recent memory loss. They may have difficult difficulty in planning or solving problems and doing familiar tasks, something that they're used to doing all the time. For example, shopping, going to the shops, or cooking, forgetting how to make a cup of tea maybe, or taking a longer time making a cup of tea, because they're having difficulty in planning all these tasks. They also get confused about time, space, and wandering. They tend to wander. I've had a patient who forgot where he parked his car in the car park of a shopping center and spent half his day just looking for his car. They also have problems with visual information. So bright patterns can be scary to them. Holes, circles can appear as holes, and they have difficulty in distinguishing colors, which are very similar in the spectrum. They also can have problems speaking and writing, and eventually most people will have problems speaking. They also have poor judgment and decision making. So they may not be able to deal with their finances, or make poor judgment when it comes to finances. Changes in mood and behavior are very common. Misplacing things, putting the car keys in the bathroom, as I mentioned last time. Thrown off by routine. They like to stick to their routine, and any change in routine can confuse them. And they can have poor sleep or sleep excessively. These are all the early signs of dementia, but this can progress, and eventually the whole brain is affected. So all the systems can be affected. Next slide. So what are the risk factors which lead to dementia? As Fiona mentioned, smoking, drinking alcohol in excess, having poor control of your diabetes and high blood pressure, being overweight, having a poor social life, and not exercising very well. We also know those with limited education can also be at risk of dementia. So what can we do to prevent dementia? So we need to be physically active. We need to look after our health. We need to look after our heart. So make sure that our blood pressure is well controlled. Our diabetes is well controlled. Follow a healthy diet. So Mediterranean style diet with plenty of fresh fruits and vegetables, and a diet which is low in meat and dairy will help. Enjoy social activity. We know that being socially engaged definitely does reduce your chance of dementia. It keeps your brain challenged, and it keeps your brain engaged. Certain challenge your brain. So brain challenging exercises, but it doesn't have to be any specific exercise. It can be anything that challenges your brain and which you're likely to continue. So anything that actually interests you. So maybe take up a musical instrument or learn a new language. There's some evidence that those people who know more than one language are actually at a lower risk of having dementia. So those of you who can't read and write, why not take up Gujarati? It's our mother tongue after all. I've taken up Jainism. I'm learning more and more about Jainism. And it's fascinating. The more I learn, the more I want to learn about it. Next slide. So once you suspect that someone has dementia, you go to a GP. Your GP takes a good history, a medical history, and not only from the patient, but also from the family member. It's very important to get that really good history from the family member, because the patient might not be aware that they have a problem. So a good history from the family member is crucial in making a diagnosis, because physical examination and blood test and ECG will not give us that. We don't have, as Fiona mentioned, we don't have a blood test which actually diagnoses dementia. The blood tests are there to rule out other causes of dementia. So the GP will do blood test and ECG, and then a screening memory test, which includes your memory, your spatial awareness, and abstract reasoning. So they may ask you things like, Can you subtract 7 from 100 and keep subtracting, or ask you to fold a piece of paper and put it on the floor, just to see whether you're able to follow commands and understand the commands that were given. Mood is also assessed, because we know that depression can mimic as dementia sometimes. Other causes that can mimic as dementia are delusion, which is an acute confusional state of the mind, and brain tumor can also mimic as dementia. And hence a brain scan is done. The brain scan is generally done in the memory clinic, a CT scan or an MRI scan, to rule out any other cause for the memory problem, and also to confirm the diagnosis of dementia. So when the patient is referred to the memory clinic, the doctor, depending on the type of dementia, may or may not start you on medication. We'll come to that in just a minute. Next slide. So after a few months or years, the patient will deteriorate. Unfortunately, even after medication is started, we do find that there is some deterioration. So the patient may be able to produce fewer words, so speech becomes a problem. May start needing help with washing, bathing, and dressing, and with eating and drinking. So they may need to have special cutlery to eat with, and they may need a cup which is secure and does not leak, to drink with. They may also have difficulty in swallowing and may need thickened fluids or pureed food. They may have difficulty in standing and walking and need walking aids. And they may not be fit to drive anymore. In fact, once a diagnosis of dementia is made, the DVLA needs to be informed. But the patient doesn't necessarily need to stop driving. The time will come when he will not, or he or she will not be fit to drive. And this, if the family members or friends think that the person is not fit to drive, that is the time when they should stop driving. Next page. So what can we do to support the person with dementia? The brunt of the care obviously lies on the family member, and often we know that it's the spouse or an adult daughter who are the carers. And as time goes, as we saw in our previous slide, the person needs more and more help, and this can be very stressful to the carers, and we know that the carers also need help and support and respite. So there's lots of there is help available for carers, and we'll come to that later on. But how can we support the person with the dementia? So each person is an individual, a unique individual, and one size does not fit all. So think of the person, think of their what's their memory functions like, what is their eyesight and mobility like, what are they like as in their personality? Are they an extrovert, an introvert? An extrovert may like group activities, but an introvert might not be comfortable in this kind of group activity. What are their past history? What are their interests? Previous jobs, leisure activities. My grandmother, she liked knitting when she was little. So, as she got older, we started giving her, little projects to knit, and she loved that. So, think of what their previous interest was, and try and encourage them to take that up, which will stimulate their brain and keep them active. Social factors. So, what were their cultural and religious beliefs? So, and were they outgoing? Did they like going out with friends, relatives? Where are they living? So, all these things should be taken into consideration when actually thinking of how we're going to support this person with dementia and what kind of activity would be suited for them. Day centers, maybe Mrs. Shah, who is 85 years of age, might not like going to a day center, where they do ballroom dancing, but she may be more comfortable going to a Indian religious, afternoon somewhere. So think about what interests that person, and then think about the social activities or any activities around that. Next slide. So we talked about medication for dementia. So mainly there are two groups of medication for dementia. The first group, the medication in that group are called donepezil, rivastigmine, and galantamine. So donepezil is the most commonly prescribed drug in the NHS. Donepezil can help improve some memory functions, anxiety, improve motivation, and they help continue the day-to-day activities and reduce behavioral changes. We know that it helps for several months, and then we may start seeing slight deterioration after many months. Some patients don't tolerate these medications very well, and hence, if they don't tolerate one, we switch to another one. The second group of drug is called memantine. Donepezil is actually licensed for Alzheimer's disease only, and it may be licensed for Lewy body dementia, but not for vascular dementia. Donepezil can cause diarrhea and other kind of side effects. The second group of drug called memantine is actually licensed for severe Alzheimer's disease and for moderate Alzheimer's disease, where donepezil is actually not being tolerated. So both these drugs are used for dementia. The other drugs that we commonly use in patients with dementia is depression treatment, because we know that depression can go hand in hand with dementia. And if we treat their depression, some of their functions actually improve. Last week, someone asked a question about antipsychotic medication. Now, antipsychotic medication, as the name implies, actually are designed for mental health problems like schizophrenia or bipolar disorder. They're not designed for dementia and can be harmful. But there is place for antipsychotic medication. Next slide. So sometimes as the disease progresses, we find that patients have a challenging behavior. They can have aggression, agitation, hallucination, delusional thoughts, and self-harm, and actually harm other people as well. But there's always, there can be a treatable cause for this, and always think, can it be treated? Is there anything that's bothering this person who is not able to express himself? Is it constipation? When was the last time they opened their bowels? A very simple thing like that can actually cause behavioral problems in a person with dementia. And once we've treated the constipation, they're back to normal. Medication, sometimes they're just on too many medication. Polypharmacy is a big problem in patients with dementia. So think, is it their medication which is causing them drowsiness and causing these problems? Pain is another big problem. So are they whinging when they're moving their limbs? Is there any swelling? Think about pain as a cause of the challenging behavior. Disturbed sleep. Make sure that they have a quiet room without any noise and light pollution for them to sleep in. Could it be an infection, a urinary tract infection, a respiratory infection, which is causing this acute confusional state and challenging behavior? If the challenging behavior still carries on, and if there is a significant risk to the patient or to others, or if this behavior is causing severe distress, only then do we sometimes use antipsychotic medication to treat this condition. Next slide. So whilst the patient is still able to make decisions, it's a very good idea to plan for the future, to plan ahead. The benefits of planning ahead are that the patient is able to express their desires and their preferences, for the future. For example, someone who has difficulty with feeding might want to refuse artificial feeding if they're not able to, if their feeding gets worse in future. During COVID times, they may want to refuse intubation if they got COVID and if their condition deteriorated and was bad enough that they needed an intubation. They may want to refuse that. It's a good idea to have a lasting power of attorney at this stage. And I know that CAT8 has covered this topic, so I'm not going to talk too much on this. Advanced statements about their wishes and preference. So where would they like to be treated? What kind of treatment do they prefer? They can refuse treatment. For example, they can refuse to have, treatment for say if they have cancer, they can refuse to have treatment, so they can refuse treatment, but unfortunately they can't request any particular specific treatment, but they can refuse treatment. They can also express a preference for a place of care and death. Next slide. In the later stages, the patient has limited speech, becomes more and more dependent on others. They need a total 24-hour care. They sleep more. They eat and drink a lot less. In fact, they eating and drinking becomes a real challenge, and it's very distressing for the family to see their loved one just withering away sometimes. They become chair-bound and bed-bound. They get recurrent urinary and chest infections and need admission into hospital. These kind of symptoms tell us that the patient probably has a few months or many weeks, if not days. Next slide. So we cannot change the outcome in dementia, but with good support, we can certainly change the journey of a person through dementia. And these are all the different supports, that we can actually tap into. Supports for meals at home, paid carers, direct payment. I know that CAT8 has actually done a webinar on social care, and direct payment and financial support and benefits have been talked about. Other services like sitting service, befriending services, they're all really useful. When dealing with patients with dementia. Next slide. So I really thank Alzheimer's Society. They have a world of information on their website, and anybody interested should have a look at it. There's the Carers Trust and Care UK and Tide. Thank you. Over to Rajal.
Thanks guys. It's already been such a powerful, lots of powerful statements that have been coming through, even touching on last week's webinar. For those that haven't seen it, I highly recommend it. It's been excellent. I think one thing I take away from you, Anuja, is I love the sentence, good support changes the journey for those, that have dementia. I think that's critically important. And I think that, Fiona has touched on different aspects that Alzheimer's Society is actually now, fully focused on. We know the challenges around social care. It's fantastic to hear that there's solid championing that, because we do forget about, the people that are the carers and the informal carers. And I think it's vitally important to make sure that we're considering that. Vivek, would you mind going on to the next slide, please? So for me, I'm just going to touch very briefly on the way we communicate. I think, the journey of communication is really, really important. how we look at individuals, how we communicate with them, you know, even just something very simple as speaking to someone with a smile. You know, basically it's how would we want to be treated? As Anuja asked the very first question, you know, what are the things that are important to you? And if they were all taken away, how would you feel? So I think it's very important to take that as a message, that, you know, if we're working with individuals that have dementia, you know, being a dementia friend is a fantastic thing. Being a support mechanism is a fantastic thing. And just being within the family and supporting family members or even friends who've got parents with dementia, you know, you walk in and understand just a simple smile or a communication that's a direct eye-to-eye contact at their level. If they're sitting down, bend down, have a chat. I think these sort of things are really important. And we have a support mechanism, which is all the different societies that, you know, that Anuja's already mentioned, Alzheimer's, as we've already mentioned. There's a lot out there. And I think tech, you know, Fiona touched a little bit around, you know, the new innovative ways of communicating and the different research that Alzheimer's is supporting on, which is, you know, things that one of the reasons why Vivek and I as the family have, you know, gone into this arena, because we truly believe that tech is a huge facilitator and an influencer on how we actually work within families and within individuals that have dementia. And it's a fantastic opportunity to start adopting all of these new techs. Vivek, I'll let you carry on with the tech.
Thanks, Mum. And again, just wanted to reiterate, thanks so much to Fiona earlier. Obviously, she's gone now, and also Dr. Anuja. I think your insight into the depth of the condition of dementia is hugely important for everyone to recognize. And I think just to kind of give the impact to everyone, it can occasionally seem quite scary when you're hearing a lot of these things and you're reading these things, and you're kind of hearing it from a doctor's perspective as well, who's obviously had so much experience in dealing with individuals with dementia. But I think what we kind of need to take from that is these are important factors that are massively helpful in helping us as family members recognize individuals, maybe parents, nannies, nanas, whoever they might be, who are suffering with dementia. But I think what we need to always remember is that individual's not a patient, and they are a family member, and they're someone who's within your household or someone you very much care about. So it's then about creating a more comfortable environment for that individual. Because at the end of the day, I think a key phrase that always stands out to me is saying someone is living with dementia and they're not suffering from dementia, because you can live with dementia very well, and you can have a regular life, and you can be very well, especially if you have all of the supportive mechanisms around you. And that's some of the key things that I wanted to kind of go into as well from a technology piece, that as family members, these are maybe some things that you might look at. These are some things that us as a family have personally done, and things that we have felt have created a lot of comfort for us, and especially when we're not necessarily living with Nanny, we know that she is safe and she is comfortable. So I think for us as a family member, the most important thing has been having some kind of tracking device on Nanny, especially because she has the desire to go to the shops, and we want her to go to the shops and go to the market, get her fruit and veg and everything else that she needs. But just us having that ability of that tracking device is just something that is super comfortable. Whether it's a small device, you can kind of see there's this, I don't know if you can see my mouse, there's this kind of thing. After the webinar, and when we put in the comments on YouTube, I can share all of the links of all of these devices as well. Or you can also just have a phone and you have that Find My Friends app on the phone. So that's one thing as a family member who's now feeling comfortable that my nanny can go for a walk and I don't mind. Next thing is Anuja touched on, how can you keep mentally stimulated, and things like games, even just mobile games, things on an iPad, doing crosswords, doing a Sudoku, different things like that. They help that individual remain stimulated. And I think that stimulation is hugely important. whether it's through activities like that or meeting friends and remaining social. All of these things are massively important. And then if you take it back to, again, us as a family, if Nani was by herself, what are we going to try and do to make sure she's still active with other people? Maybe she can come and stay at our house for a few days, or maybe we can take her out and help her visit her other friends, because Nani can't drive at the minute, so we can go and do that for her. Again, with the remembering that this person is part of the family, this person is not a patient, this person is my Nani, and I want her to live a good life through her old age as well. The third point, digital access of friends and of past family pictures and storyboards. I don't know if you guys were on the last webinar, but I had spoken about the bookshelf analogy where individuals living with dementia end up losing their short-term memory, and they are eventually kind of living in the past, where they think maybe 20 or 30 years ago is something that happened recently. Which means if you end up showing images of when they were younger, when they were back in, I don't know, Uganda, Kenya, India, wherever it might have been, it allows them to then reconnect with that past history and reconnect with that memory, and brings a lot of joy to them. And if you remember as well from that analogy, the feelings stay, the memories don't necessarily stay. So allowing someone to feel that happiness, they will remember that piece. Online guidance, massively important. I think Manish will be sharing a few links with you following the presentation as well. But there's so much available online that you can use to help you understand and recognize what's important and what's good to deal with. And especially webinars like these are always going to give you a huge amount of insight, just like Anuja and Fiona did previously. Finally, access to your health records and your care plans. As a family, you should always be pushing for these, whether it's from the GP, where you can get access to the health records of your loved one, or if it's from any care providers that you might be bringing into the family. Always make sure you have some form of care plan and history to make sure you know what the carers are doing for your loved one, but also you can then act on that. So if they're doing something, for example, making a cup of tea and having a few biscuits, and that's something that maybe in my case, Nani has really enjoyed, then I know it's something that I'm also going to want to do with her to make sure she feels that same feeling of doing that. So,
and I think just to add to that, Vivek, is you know, last week we touched on know the person. Yeah. So, you know, Anuja touched on the care planning, the advanced care planning. You know, take the opportunity at the time when they know that discussion. So, you know, you know their likes, their dislikes, and the care planning is a very vital element at the stages where you feel that, yeah, you're recognizing there are memory losses, a diagnosis has been, you know, ascertained from the GP element. So it's important to make sure that, you know, the concept around know the person is really important. And that can also be held digitally. You don't have to have it in a piece of paper. There are, you know, elements out there that records can be held digitally and they can be changed over time.
Yeah, thanks for that. So I just wanted to move on to the next point, which has already been touched on, so I won't be here long. I think the key thing in terms of consistency of communication is massively important, and recognizing what the individual you're talking to who might be living with dementia is actually feeling. And I think that's one thing that we should all take from these webinars is what are the kind of the way that individual feels, the way they're thinking, the way they're dealing with the situations and the way they have to live. And if we can recognize that, we can then help them through that journey as well, and make sure that we're giving them the most comfortable life as possible. I wanted to just touch very briefly on one key thing. And as a family, it might be something you decide to think about, especially if you have someone living with you who has dementia. One thing that is always something that can be very challenging for an individual living with dementia is color perception and their ability to actually see different colors and different hues. So a hue is it red, orange, blue, green, different colors like that. And being able to recognize those colors can be a challenge, especially if the tones of them are quite similar. You have greens, which are very similar to blues, and being able to distinguish between those is very difficult. So in some cases, and especially if you see in hospitals or memory wards, there's going to be a lot of different colors. And the reason why that's the case, as you can kind of see in that top right image is it helps that person recognize that there are different shapes around, and you end up becoming a bit colorblind when you have dementia. So that's very important. And actually something with the food, again, is something that you can even do on a smaller scale within your home. You get these plates which have different colors, and it helps the individual who's living with dementia recognize what they're actually eating. Are they eating their vegetables? Are they eating their meat? Are they eating their grains or their dairy? What part of their food are they eating? And they can recognize that by the color. So I just wanted to highlight that point. I think it's something that people don't necessarily think about, but is massively important. But just to close off, I just wanted to reiterate the point that the individual who's living with you with dementia is a family member, is a loved one. They're not a patient. So it's so important as a family and as a whole group to do whatever you can to make that person as comfortable as possible. I know it can be scary, especially when you hear a lot of the symptoms and everything else around it. But these are things that are important to know and important to understand so you can then take action. But at that point, I'm just going to hand back over to Manish with also some Q&A that we can do now.
Great, thank you, Vivek. That was great, and thank you, Rajal, as well, and Anuja for a great, incisive and detailed look at dementia, and also what can we actually do with having some practical measures to help people with dementia. One of the things which I wanted to just reflect on is the carers. And Fiona mentioned some of the research that Alzheimer's Society has been doing. And we clearly, in this presentation, talked a lot about the person with dementia and the support that's available for people with dementia and the kind of carers and families. However, there's probably a separate discussion altogether about what happens with carers, because as Fiona mentioned, through this COVID crisis, we are having situations whereby carers are burning out. So if you are experiencing this in your family at the moment, where one person has the sole responsibility or the substantial response for looking after somebody with dementia, then how do you, as a family, mobilize yourselves to support each other? And we went through this whole journey with my mum, from diagnosis to when she died was 15 years. So over that time period, as Anuja sort of mentioned, lots of things change. And Vivek, your point about the family members, this is a family member, this is your mom, this is your grandmother, this is your father, and it's that part of it. So how do you make sure that that person is cared for and they can live as best as they can? However, we should be cognizant that you as a carer are also going to go through some challenging situations yourself, because we're not equipped with a guidebook which tells us exactly what to do in every situation, every circumstance. Some of this, we will have to sort of see how things progress, and what worked yesterday may not work tomorrow. So, it is very important to just be aware, to constantly talk amongst the family members and friends about the things which are going on with somebody with dementia, and actually then support each other. But we may well do a separate session on carers, depending on the appetite amongst the group at large. But it is something which I know there is a considerable amount of certainly anxiety about. How do you help somebody with dementia, but also how do you help each other and look after somebody with dementia? So here are some of the resources that we put up last time around, and we have also got on the CAT8 webinars YouTube channel that this is something which you can go to the Living Wills and LPA webinar that was done, but also there's a social care webinar. So again, there's more information there. Somebody asked about Dementia Friends, and again, there's a link there about Dementia Friends. I would encourage all of you to become a dementia friend. And I think having done these 2 sessions, hopefully you have a better understanding of what somebody who's going through dementia, has on a day-to-day basis and experience on a day-to-day basis. But I think as a society, the more of us who talk about this amongst each other, we can reduce the social stigma. I talked last time about social stigma. It's important that by talking, Vivek, you highlighted so succinctly about, that family person, the family member, it is a human being, it's a person, and that stigma, the more of this we talk amongst ourselves as a community, as a community and a family, then the better it is. I think with that, I will probably end there because I'm sure I'm going to run out of time, and there are probably some questions coming through that, Rumit, I'm sure you'll have us and a panel. We haven't got that much time, so apologies for the extended way we have gone through in a lot of detail today. Over to you.